All right, Islam, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this video. Thank you for tuning in to this study session. Um, Today's video will be over the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, and basically this will be a recap of J. Germain Bay's study sessions that have been going on for the past several weeks on Monday nights. Um, this document, amongst many other documents dealing with diplomatic relations, is a good initiatory phase to understand in relation to statehood. Okay, so let's just get straight to it and touch base on the reality of things. So we don't just want to read the black and white. We want to talk about how we can exercise this, right? We got to think on multi-dimensional. We got to think on three dimensions or three different levels, if you want to say more than one level. Okay, in some of these articles. So starting off, we see that obviously states parties are the present convention, right? So it's states, right? This is not going over overseas as whatever your group is to so-called establish diplomatic relations without being a state first. You have to be a state. Okay. This is a box we have to check. So as we continue, we see recalling the peoples. As we read these articles like this, the sentences like this, it says recalling, having in mind, believing, realizing, affirming that, etc., etc. This is basically all in reference of. Okay, so this is what you call the whereas section. Okay, so this section is basically the section in when you're enacting a law that you're basically referencing to, giving reference of. Okay, what treaties, what documents, so that certain people can can um go back and see what type of treaties give you this power to do to enact this law or to enforce this law. Okay, so we see that recalling the peoples of all nations from ancient times, having recognized that the status of diplomatic agents, having in mind the purpose and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, right? So, and it goes down to basically say that the Charter of the United Nations gives us this power, right? As we read down to Article 1, it gives us the definitions, okay? For the purpose of the present convention, the following expressions shall have the meanings hereunder assigned to them. The head of the mission is the person charged by the sending state with the duty of acting in that capacity, right? So we have a whole lineup of definitions. Okay, that's important. Now, throughout this video, I won't be reading every single point, okay? But I will be highlighting the key points. All right, so we can talk about. You can go back and read more so on the definitions on your own time, and we'll talk about them as we go throughout this convention. So Article 2 says the establishment of diplomatic relations between states and the permanent diplomatic missions takes place by mutual consent. Okay, so what is diplomatic relations all about? Diplomatic relations is about friendly application, friendly mediumships, right? Before we do anything. Why? Because we have a treaty of peace and friendship, right? Not only do we have a treaty of peace and friendship, but this is based on political principles, okay, diplomatic relations, okay, in general. So, in order to grow, right, there's diplomatic relations, but there's also what we call recognition. So, as more states develop, they'll have to send their letters of recognition and receive letters of recognition from other more states. And so, the this is a build-up process. Diplomatic relations is the same yet different from recognition. Okay, it's a build-up process. So if states wouldn't be recognized, nonetheless, diplomatic relations should be kept for a numerous amount of reasons, especially in more states. But this is the difference between the two. We're going to explain the difference between the two as we continue. So it's mutual consent, right? Obviously, by between the states. So is the United States a state or is it a corporation? So the whole thing is about checking the boxes. We have to, in order to be in a certain arena, you have to check the boxes. What boxes? What are the boxes? The boxes are the instructions. Are you applying the instructions to whatever convention that you're trying to enforce? That's the box. Whatever instructions are. So in order to enforce a treaty, what's the boxes you have to check before that? You have to establish yourself as a state, as we get elected officials, right? The inauguration, etc. Establish yourself as a state, and then be able to enforce these treaties. So, as we continue, right, we understand that it takes mutual consent. Article 3, the functions of diplomatic missions consist inter alia in representing the sending state and the receiving state. Okay. Let's read the next one right quick. Protecting in the receiving state the interests of the sending state and its nationals within the limits permitted by international law. Okay, so let's pause right quick. Sending state and receiving state. Who is the sending state? Anybody want to take a guess? Who is the sending state and receiving state is? No.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. The
Probably,
sending state
I guess
and the
my guess
receiving
would
state.
be
The
like,
receiving state in this case, right? The receiving state would be us as more states. The sending state would be the United States acting as the United States of America. So why would it be that? Because if we look back at the treaty, right, we just plugging and playing, right? We picking up where we left off. Where did we leave off at? Where we left off at the fact that the Sultan of Morocco, Treaty of Peace and Friendship, right? They accepted Americans to be on this land, right? They were the sending state. The United States was the sending state. They came here. We received them, right? We're the receiving state. So, being that we're accepting them, they're in our jurisdiction, they're on our landmass, right? We gave them limited jurisdiction, right? So the receiving state would be Morocco or the Moorish states. Sending states would be whoever has sent these diplomats or these representatives or delegates um, to wherever they went, right? So being that they were in our landmass and nobody technically sent them, if you want to say Great Britain, you can, but um, they this is where we have to think on multiple levels a little bit. But we're gonna talk about more about that as we read these articles. So it says C says negotiating with the government of the receiving state. Okay, so we're talking about the functions of diplomatic mission on a diplomatic mission, right? So negotiating with the government of the receiving state. Okay, so remember the first box is the checks is the estate. Okay, so taking United States to court, we got to make sure everybody's box up checked. What happens when you don't show up? Well, you start to acquiesce. If you can't check the boxes, you got to acquiesce. So this is where a long list of things start to come into play as far as liquidation, a numerous amount of things. So negotiating with the government of a receiving state, ascertaining, by all lawful means, conditions and developments in the receiving state, and reporting thereon to the government of the sending state, promoting friendly relations between the sending state and the receiving state, and developing their economic, cultural, and scientific relations. Okay, so within Article 3 so far, specifically E, you see where it says developing their economic, cultural, and scientific relations. Okay, so let's pause right there and go to this. This is from France and United States of America case. Okay, it says the sovereign. This is the triple principles I'm about to read. Okay, the triple principles that Jay Bay speaks on a lot. Triple principles. This is an active voucher series, right? These triple principles. What is it? The sovereignty and independence of His Majesty the Sultan, right? So we got sovereignty and independence as the first triple principle. What does that mean? We establish ourselves as state, right? And independence means it's totally separate from the United States, right? No EINs, no none of that. No USA passports, no none of that. The Sultan needed no USA passport. We don't no none of that, right? But what is the Sultan in this case? The Sultan is the Moorish states. Okay. So until we replace our old time religion, right, our old time ways of Islam, what is our old time way? Our old time customs, traditions, practices, ways of governing this land, i.e., government. We're reintroducing that, right, by first learning government from the Europeans, right, while we reinstitute our old time ways that have been missing for quite some time. So the sovereignty and independence, establish yourself in the state, sovereign and independent. The second principle, integrity of his domains or integrity of domains, is the by far the hardest principle, or the principle that will give you the most experience to exercise, because integrity of domains is you creating your state IDs and enforcing that. What is that going to do? Take experience, okay? That's going to take people having to be familiar. That may startle a few egos, right? Integrity of domains is consular court documents being sent out, right, and respected, right? This is you exercising your laws in your state, because what is your domains? Your domains is your state, i.e., your country. State is another name for country, right? So state is not only a political government. State as not only your state of mind, it is also abstract when you're talking about political science or the metaphysics of law, if you will. But integrity of domains is also talking about state, which is also talking about the country as well, right? We understand that the Moorish Science Temple of America is not a state, as I reiterated several times, right? The Moorish Science Temple of America is not a country, right? That's not the name of the country, right? It's a theocratic government in another state. So the integrity of his domains, or the integrity of your domains, is a state being able to put people on notice, exercising your laws, right, in your state, being able to, the integrity is even when you're not around, they respect you. So they should do what's right. It shouldn't take trial and error. It shouldn't take for you to, or for them to bump into you. What is it truly going to take? It's going to take for us to have to enforce that by taking them to the ICJ, right? So integrity of his domains, or integrity of domains, is
Said
second
that.
principle.
Sorry to cut you off. We said the ICJ.
Yeah, the International Court of Justice.
International Court of Justice. Okay.
So you have the International Court of Justice. You have what's called the ICC, which is the International Criminal Court, and that's for personal, when individuals are being taken to the ICC. So the ICJ is for states, state versus state.
Okay.
So we have the third principle is economic liberty without any inequality. So this economic liberty without any inequality is basically the way that Moors have been taken by, without checking the first two boxes: sovereignty, independence, integrity of his domain. What do I mean by that? Economic liberty, we see Moors have been trying to be industrious, as Noble Drew stated, right? Doing business as, right? So a lot of Moors is doing business as organizations in the United States so they can do business. Some of them, beating cases, some of them not paying for things, some of them, doing a number of small victory things, but they're small victories, right? It only gets you so far. If you don't check the two boxes, especially when you're not checking that box right. Economics, learn doing business, is being industrious is fine, but to do business in an oppressor system opposed to your own is a problem. So that one box was partially done.
I see. That last point was yeah. Under the oppressor's system, no one do that.
Right. And so that's why Noble Drew said, I brought you everything, yet the half has not been told. So he couldn't tell us the half because international law was going to tell us the half. And so he did what he could. He didn't bring us everything in whole because the half has not been told. Well, now it's being told by the so-called quote unquote new Moors. We already know that's spiritual concept. So,
would you say like would you say why do you think Noble Drew Ali didn't really speak upon international law as much as he did? Because I think if he
well,
did a little more, I think it wouldn't be a much of a confusion. Not saying that he didn't, you know.
oh yeah, it's a lot of factors to um, put in the scope when we talk about Noble Drew international law, because the Geneva Convention is international law. More say he was at the Geneva Convention. That's international law. The thing is looking at the full scope of things. We know that there was Noah Drali. We know that there was COINTELPRO. We know that there was even dirty wars, right? That COINTELPRO used, right? So when we look at the active adversaries that came out in 1906, of course Noah Drali knew about
Mm.
that, right? Of course, but it's just COINTELPRO that like a lot of Moors are familiar with any Moors treaty except the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. That's COINTELPRO directly. That's like Nike giving you two pair of shoes, put only two pair of shoes on display. They got 100 different pairs in the back. They just trying to, they got this their own little plan, right? So they give you this treaty of peace and friendship on these two pair of shoes. All these other pair of shoes are these other treaties in the back, right? Because that's how COINTELPRO operate. They kept the actual substance the furthest away, while they tried to funnel the substance into the mid heaven, if you will, and try to make like everything, like literally everything that the government being our stuff being incorporated in the United States is all that we need, as long as we, see Cannon Bay did that, establishing states, so-called states, but getting them sent and approved, stamped by the United States, incorporated in that state. So those are not true sovereign and independent states. See, it's nowhere in a treaty that says to do that. When the United Nations, the highest system, supreme law of the land, has its own instructions as to how to establish a state, and none of it has to do with incorporating whatever you're doing in the state, so-called state that you're in, right? So it's a lot of things that was funneled. So, and that's just one of the aspects in relation to no drug international law, because the statement, and I'm not gonna stick on oral quotes too long, but where he said that he had to uh somebody's thumb in his elbow, but basically um I can't remember at the moment, but basically um he had to remember he only did have to he can only do what he could. He can only do what he could, right? So he had to do the most as far as um, diplomatic relations, et cetera, while being incorporated in the United States, knowing that that's not the way to go. Like that's for now. That's at the least we can do, type of thing.
Right.
Tell everybody
He did what
everything.
he could. Yeah.
They was gonna go back to sleep. See it in a lot of Moors jumping for joy right now, talking about more states is what we need, because everybody's stiff necked and hard headed. Everybody's stuck in their ways. They think that you know doing business as an organization and having a so-called small victories and figuring out how to use the birth certificate and all this type of stuff is the way to go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Them small, like I be seeing like people using like utilizing the AA 214. You know, if you yeah, and then like get tax exempt. Like I would say that kind of would be an example of that as well. Like a small victory. You know.
And see, as we transition out of this topic, the thing about that is that the being that that's the least we can do what Noble Drew brought, right? He had started it. Things be obviously changed in their system, so we had to keep up, right? Um, the least we could do is at least learn from the European, right, government. Even though they're not a government, United States, they're a corporation acting like a government, so establishing anything in that is not firm. Um,
Chris Rock.
right, right. That was clever. Um, so it, as far as that's the least we can do. But again, even till now, right? As more states, we use the straw man for now. We put the straw man in the more state government, so that way the whole thing is protected. Your whole corporation is protected, no matter what angle they come across. No matter what angle. Um, so we put the whole so-called straw man or the non-begeer under the Moore state, and then we take them to court to enforce that recognition, right, or that acknowledgement of the fact. And we enact laws to protect that, enforce that even further, etc. So the least we can do, again, is like Noble Drew Ali said, we keep, excuse me, we keep our names, right? Even the Bibles, right? So, and that's for a reason because we put it under the state. So we was learning, it was a stepping stone, you know. So I'm not gonna say that way was, that's the dirty more way or anything like that. But that's at one point in time, that's the least we can do, So, I appreciate people who really, teaching that type of stuff, But it's we got to check the boxes in order now. We got to establish sovereignty, independence, and then exercise our integrity of our domains, which is exercising everything in your national trust, right? Your property, all your assets, making sure your laws is enforced and respected, right? And then economic liberty. That's when we get the wealth coming in. That's when things start to, I'm not gonna say ease up, but third heaven start to, we ain't gonna get into the science of three and all
Why not?
that.
Why not?
Well, it's
I gotta keep the law.
I just say this, I expounded this on this in my video dealing with telepathy as well, and psychomancy. In the book Psychomancy, it speaks on this as well. But 3 seconds, and well, I'll tell you this: in the book Psychomancy, it says that, well, by Frank Young, it says that if you think for something on 3 seconds, right, it it's basically likely to come true based on the metaphysical and the psychological aspect of your mind and your consciousness. So we're dealing with just nature, basically the science of nature.
It's 3:39 too as we speak.
Right. So it's pretty extensive, but three just dealing with manifestation, dealing with the physical body in general. Uh, 3 seconds, again, by Frank Young in the book Psychomancy, he expounded upon that, um, et cetera, et cetera. The triangle, you know, um, we're dealing with the third dimension, right? Again, the body.
The
So,
Trinity.
right, child, right, again, birth, the fruition. So, as we finish Article 3, nothing, the second point. It says nothing in the present convention shall be construed as preventing the performance of consular functions by diplomatic relations. Okay. Now, consular functions, that's going to be another document. Okay. And I will say that consular functions, it seems as though um, the personal aspect or the actual seat of office is more protected than the actual official, opposed to diplomatic relations. The actual official seems to be heavily protected. But that's for we'll talk about that as we go along. So Article 4 says the sending state must make certain that the agreement of the receiving state has been given for the person of its purpose to accredit as the head of its mission to the state. Okay, so the heads of the mission shall be notified and in agreement of everything that's going on. Right. The receiving state not obliged to give reasons to the sending state for the refusal of agreement. So if they refuse to let XYZ happen, for them not to come, they don't need to give reason why. They said, why they made that decision. And let's think about this before we continue. Well, we'll talk about it because it's going to say that. Article 5 says the sending state may, after it has given due notification to the receiving states concerned, accredited a head of the mission or assign any member of a diplomatic staff, as a case may be, to more than one state, unless there is express objection by any of the receiving state. So when we're talking about where it says it may send, accredit a head of mission or assign any member of a diplomatic staff, right? So a head of a mission is official, a state official, right? A head of a state, right? Who is the head of a state? The state officials. Now it says any member of a diplomatic staff. Now, Moorish Science Temple of Americas have members, right? They don't have Moorish nationals because a national is one that pledges allegiance to a state, right? So to be a Moorish national, you got to pledge allegiance to a state. So if you're not pledging allegiance to a state, you're not a Moorish national in truth. But where it says members, organizations have members, such as the Moorish Science Temple of America, right? That's a religious organization, right? Such as other organizations, right? These are members of diplomatic staff that can be sent on behalf of on behalf of the state, right? So it can be a head of a mission, right? The head of a state, or it can be a member of diplomatic staff, right? And this is what you call track two diplomacy, okay? And with track two, another name for track two diplomacy is called back channel diplomacy. Say either or, okay? And that's basically when non-governmental organizations, or what you call NGOs, or non-governmental organizations, or unofficial contacts, basically people who are not officials, right? Unofficial contacts basically are sent on behalf of the state. That's called track two diplomacy or back channel diplomacy. Okay. Um, and another word is called non-state actors. Okay. Non-state actors. All these are synonymous terms. Okay. Um, it says Article 5, Part 2 says, Section 2 says, if the sending state accredits a head of a mission to one or more other states, it may establish a diplomatic mission headed by charge d'affaires ad interim in each state where the head of mission has not his permanent seat. Hold on, I gotta read that up. If the sending state accredits the head of mission to one or more other states, it may establish a diplomatic mission headed by charge d'affaires ad interim in each state where the head of mission has not his permanent seat. Okay. So continuing, a head of mission or any member of diplomatic staff of the mission may act as representative of the sending state to any international organization. Okay. So again, we're talking about NGOs, right? Article 6 says two or more states may accredit the same person as head of mission to another state, unless objection is offered by receiving state. Pretty basic, right? So I will tell you around Article 12 is where we'll start to begin to talk about another frequency of thing. Article 7. Subject to the provisions of Article 5, 8, 9, and 11, the sending state may freely appoint the members of the staff of the mission. In the case of military, naval, and air attaches, the receiving state may require their name to be submitted beforehand for its approval. Okay. So when we're talking about the name, we're talking about what? The name of persons, right? Okay. So to give somebody the name, obviously that person got to be protected, right? We're talking about diplomatic relations, diplomats being protected, right? That's what this convention is all about. So in order to check the boxes, in order to submit a name, you got to already be protected. Who protects persons, states? Is the United States a state or is it a corporation? It's a corporation. Okay. Or we taking the United States of America to court, right? Okay, well, everybody gotta be United States officials, United States of American officials. Are they United States of American officials? No. Okay. Well, it's looking like acquiescence. You see? So to require the names to be submitted beforehand for its approval. Article 8 says members of the diplomatic staff of the mission should, in principle, be of the nationality of the sending state. So they must be Americans. If we got to enforce these conventions, that pretty much gives us right there what we got to call them. Americans. Right. Must be of the nationality. Now, well, that's another topic, but a nationality of the sending state. Members of the diplomatic staff of the mission may not be appointed from among persons having nationality of receiving state, except with the consent of the state, which may be withdrawn at any time. Okay, so that's another piece that you can think on multiple levels. Okay, where it says members of the diplomatic staff of the mission may not be appointed from among persons having the nationality of the receiving state. Okay, so the diplomatic staff, right, of the sending state, may not be appointed, right, by receiving state, more states, except with the consent of the state which may be withdrawn at any time. Who withdrawn at any time? See,
Since we didn't receive the state, withdraw. Wars receiving states. Well, it'd be us then. We're making
yeah,
withdrawals of what we receive.
we the receiving state, and then it says except with the consent of the state, which may be withdrawn at any time. So the state that was withdrawn is the United States of America. Why did they withdraw? Because there's no officials, there's nobody that took oaths to the United States of America. They all took oaths to the United States. Right? They all took oaths to a corporation. There's nobody in the seats of the United States of America. We're taking the United States of America to court. Right? So it says except with the consent of the state. The consent is the Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Right? We already got a list of 25 articles of what we have been given consent to. Right. So the consent is that the United States, even though they're a corporation doing business as the United States of America, they're the so-called trustees of that, right? They must still uphold their obligations regardless of what they do. They can create however many corporations they want. They still gotta uphold the obligations. So being that we fail and they still must uphold their obligations, why? Because the United Nations, they even created laws for stateless people. Why? Because we were stateless. They knew what the United States was up to. They know that the United States of America is what you call a part of the P5, which is the permanent five, right? They also know that the United States of America is truly the United States doing business, the United States of America. But the only people that can do something about that is us, because they have to follow the laws just like we do. They can only do so much, right? So it all comes back to us at the end of the day. So the consent is that we gave consent for them to be here for so long, at least 50 years, right? And that they must uphold the obligations even if we fall. So the consent of the state, right? We gave consent. Where was I at? Which may be withdrawn at any time. Who withdrew? The consent, that's mutual agreement. Withdrawn at any time. So basically, you're saying that the receiving state cannot appoint anybody, but the only time they can is when the consent of the state, which may be withdrawn at any time. When the state withdrew at any time, then we can appoint them. So therefore they're under Moorish law, right? So there's even Moors doing business as organizations in the United States. This even having situations where, depending on how they set themselves up in the United States system, they can even appoint certain officers, even though they're still truthfully more subjects in international law because they've been subjugated. Right? We want to be national, not subjects. So they give you small victories to keep that hamster wheel going. That's the only thing they can depend on to slow down the movement. They can't stop it, but they can slow it down. right? So that's a good article to exercise that um, multi-layered thinking, right? Because our situation is a little different than other people. Two jurisdictions on one landmass, right? So Article 8, Section 3 says the receiving state may reserve the same right with regard to its nationals of the third state who are not also nationals of the sending state. Okay. And third state would be us, right? Let's just read that over. You made that clear. 'Cause I don't want to waste too much time on these points. This is going to be a part two. I don't want to say this is wasting time, but this is a part two because there is going to be a part two to this. But let's read this last point right quick. It says the receiving state may reserve the same right with with regard to the nationals of the third state who are not also nationals of the sending state. So they reserve the same rights, right? So this is setting them up, no matter how they want to be, corporations or not. This is the doorway for them to step into statehood. But that's a whole nother problem for them. Article 9 says the receiving state may at any time and without having to explain its decision notify the sending state that the head of the mission or any member of the diplomatic staff of the mission is persona non grata or that any other member of the staff of the mission is not accepted. So persona non grata means a person who is not accepted. In any such case, the sending state shall, as appropriate, either recall the person concerned or terminate his functions with the mission. A person with a person may be declared non grata or not acceptable before arriving in the territory of the receiving state. Okay. So if you guys have seen what's his name? I think he changed his name, but I think his name used to be Ennis Cantor or something. Cantor Ennis or something. But he was recently Turkey had put a 500,000 dollar bounty on him. Yeah, so he's what you consider persona non grata or not accepted because he speaking out against Turkey. And so even though and see we're talking about when you're talking about visas, somebody who may be not a quote unquote citizen of another state, right? You're even talking about diplomatic relations to that degree, right? So you know, it was something else I was about to say. Okay. We'll go into that around Article 12. So Section 2 of Article 9 says if the sending state refuses or fails within reasonable period to carry out its obligations under paragraph 1 of this article, the receiving state may refuse to reorganize the person concerned as a member of the mission. Okay. So we're just following through with the last point. Article 10 says the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the receiving state or such other ministry as may be agreed shall be notified of the appointment of members of the mission, their arrival and their final departure, or the termination of their functions with the mission. So this is a box that must be checked. This is instruction. The Minister of Foreign Affairs must be notified. Notified of what? the appointment of the members of the mission, the arrival and the final departure of their termination of their functions with the mission, right? So when you come in, what you're doing, how long you're staying, when you're leaving, right? That's a box that must be checked. That's an instruction to follow. The rest of these points are pretty much in support of point A. Okay. So then we go down to section 2, where it says, where possible, prior notification of arrival and final departure shall also be given. Okay, check the boxes, right? In the absence of specific agreement as to the state, in as we go throughout these documents, this document, if any type of realistic question, situation pops up in you guys' head, I definitely encourage you guys to speak on it, comment, or ask about it, and how we can exercise that reality, you know, because as we get down to Article 12, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Okay. So Article 11 says, in the absence of specific agreement as to the size of the mission, the receiving state may require that the size of the mission be kept within the limits considered by it to be reasonable and normal, having regard to circumstances and conditions in the receiving state and to the needs of the particular mission. Well, let me make sure. Okay. Islam to you. Is you? Oh, man.
Islam, I'm just tuning in.
Islam. Good to have you. Where was I at? Okay. Article 11, Section 2 says the receiving state may equally, within similar bounds, and on a non-discriminatory basis, refuse to accept officials of a particular category. Okay. So you can be picky, right? You gotta protect yourself. Article 12. The sending state may without the prior express consent of the receiving state establish offices forming part of the mission in localities other than those in which the mission itself is established. Okay, this was not the article I thought it was. It might be Article 20 or 21. But this is still important because we're talking about offices. What are offices? We're talking about these buildings that we step into in due time, right? So it says the sending state may not, without the prior express consent of the receiving state, so without our permission, they cannot establish these offices, right? Forming part of the mission in localities. Now we have to take this in full scope, though. There's Act of Algeciras that allowed them to do so much, right? It's a treaty of peace and friendship that allowed them to do commerce, right? So we have to take this into full scope as far as what buildings in due time as we check the box, because there's going to be more than one time that we take them to court for more than one reason, right? We take them to court the first time. Why? Sovereignty and independence and integrity of domains. That's pretty much the first principle. A lot of times is the second principle because they grow into each other, right? That's why diplomatic relations has still a lot to do with consular relations. They grow into each other, right? So um, as we so as we think about the full scope of things in Article 12, we're talking about offices established, right, without consent. Now, what do we give consent to? We gotta talk about that in relation to all the Moorish treaties, right? To see what buildings, what is here, what is lawful, what is not, right? We got to check more. A lot of Moors just want to say everything is not ours, like we didn't establish a treaty of peace and friendship for them to do commerce, et cetera, right? Well, everybody has boxes to check, okay? It's just due process of law must take its course. Everything will not happen over, not literally everything, right? There must be a due process of law, which means time, right? In which things can saturate. Your understanding in law can saturate in the meantime, okay? As we learn government. So Article 13 says the head of the mission is considered as having taken up his functions in the receiving state, either when he has presented his credentials or he has been notified his arrival and true copy of his credentials has been presented to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the receiving state, or such other ministry has been agreed in accordance with the practice prevailing in the receiving state, which shall be applied in a uniform manner. Okay, so true copies of the credentials must be presented to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, true copy, right? Officials of the United States of America must. That's who the Treaty of Peace. That's who these agreements are with, right? So we're talking about those officials, not the United States. But boxes got to be checked first. In the meantime, between time, we can learn how to run government nonetheless, regardless of how anybody else can check the box, right? Okay. It goes another point, section 2 of Article 13 says the order of the presentation of credentials or of a true copy thereof will be determined by the date and time of the arrival of the head of mission. Okay. So it might be okay, it is Article 20. Okay. Yeah, my fault. It was Article 20, not 12. So Article 14 says the heads of mission are divided into three classes, namely the ambassador or the nuncios accredited to the head of state, right? B says that the envoys, ministers, and the internuncios accredited to the head of state. The charge of affairs accredited to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, right? So those are the three classes. Okay. That the ambassador, the envoys, and charge of affairs, right? Um, it says except as concerns precedence and equitique, etiquette. I cannot say that word. Etiquette. There shall be no differentiation between the heads of mission by reason of their class. Article 15, the class to which the heads of their mission are to be assigned shall be agreed between states. Okay, so documentation, who is who, agreed between states. Right, these are boxes. This is just simply how you can document. It's telling you what to put. Right, simple as that. Just check the boxes. Right, whole document of just simply what it tells you to put on the paper. Right. And that's another thing. We have to simplify this. Okay, a lot of this stuff is what you call magi talk, or some people like to call it, right? Because all the priests and priestesses, they were all so-called a part of the government back in ancient times. They always incorporated as being part of the government. So our job is to demystify all of this, simplify this. It's more favorable and more um, considerate to do that. So um, Article 16, or yeah, 16. Heads of the mission shall take proceedings in their respective classes in order of the date and the time of taking up their function in accordance with Article 13. Alterations in the credentials of the head of the mission, not involving any change of class, shall not affect his proceedings. Okay, we're going to go to Article 17, which says the proceedings of the members of the diplomatic staff of the mission shall be notified by the head of the mission and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the shall be notified by the head of the mission to the Minister of Foreign Affairs or such other ministry as may be agreed. Article 18, the procedure to be observed in each state for the reception of the heads of the mission shall be uniform in respect of each class. 19. If the post of the head of the mission is vacant, or if the head of the mission is unable to perform his function, charge the affairs ad interim, shall not provisionally as the head of the mission, should act provisionally as the head of the mission. Okay. The name of the charge of affairs ad interim shall be notified either by the head of the mission or, in the case he is unable to do so, by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the sending state to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the receiving state or such other ministry as may be agreed. Okay, so it's telling you how to plug and play if people are not present. We're going to go to Article 20 where it says the mission and its head shall have the right of the use of the flag and the emblem of the sending state on the premises of the mission, okay, including the residence of the head of the mission and on his means of transport. Okay, so the sending state has the right to use flags and emblems just as Moore's been trying to do. But who is the sending state? Americans, right? They have the right to use, in this case, they're Americans, to use flags and emblems just as we have the right. Okay, so whenever we go, right, so we got to think about this. Think about this in a little bit, 3 layers, right? They're acting as if they're the receiving state. They're acting as if this is their land, right? Because more states have been were non-existent for a long time, right? So now that that's changing, they're going to realize that they are not, just as they realized in Colorado, that they're not the um, receiving state. Okay, they're actually the sending state. Okay, so this applies whenever we go elsewhere. Okay, so just as they want to think that we're the sending state, we're driving around with our flags and emblems, etc. Right? We have this same right. This we can enforce this convention elsewhere, all around the world. Right? Our flags and emblems as diplomats, diplomatic representatives, delegates, etc. Nationals. Right? So it says, and on his means of transport. So we're talking about traveling. Okay. Article 21 says the receiving state shall either facilitate the, and think about this before we continue. Article 20, diplomatic relations in general is what? Friendly application, documentation, friendly mediumships, right? It takes documentation nonetheless. It takes building with governments, so-called states, right, to establish, or even organizations, right, to establish some type of growth to some degree, right? So um, diplomatic relations in your state, building face to face government meetings, even though they're a corporation, an international organization, right? Because this is enforcing integrity of domains. We're here for treaty of peace and friendship. Now, of course, there's always going to be two sides of the coin, right? You got yin and yang, masculine and feminine. There's two sides of the coin, right? So, what is that for? That's for consular relations. That's what you call arbitration. Okay, that's when we get into that spirit. Okay, but first we have to meet each other first, greet each other first, right? We don't approach with static. We're here for diplomatic relations. This is the first step, right? But for any state, we want to build a rapport, right? We want to, the whole point of diplomatic relations is to, like it, as it stated before, to to um, for economic growth, cultural development, right? So scientific relations. Okay, so we're talking about you. There may be even a state with similar, very similar cultural aspects, but the people, there's more people in that state who are not from there. They're from somewhere else. So a lot of times, diplomatic relations are established because obviously don't nobody want no problems, right? So they want to secure security. Diplomatic relations is about security, right? Securing a friendship, securing the first spear, right? It's about shaking that hand, right? So it's about, okay, so diplomatic relations, right, is you traveling, right? As a government official, it's you traveling, dropping off documents, right? Consular relations documents to the post office, right? You get pulled over. You got your state ID. It's your first time anybody has used it in the state. So obviously, integrity domains has not been exercised, right? First time doing it, right? Now, of course, that can go a numerous amount of ways, but it's telling you right here, this is diplomatic relations. In that moment, it's diplomatic relations. Okay. Now, I know you heard of Dipset before, right? Some of us heard of Dipset,
Yep.
who talk a lot about, um, you know, in their music, they talk a lot about, so-called being a diplomatic Taliban and not getting in trouble because they diplomats and all this types of stuff, right? Diplomatic relations. That was a. If you look up videos on YouTube, you'll find out small, even cartoon scenarios about um, uh, how diplomats cannot be touched. And for a long time, it was an issue in regards to, um, what they call contraband and, all this type of stuff. Uh, so it's, and I say that to say that amongst you being pulled over, right, you have protection according to this treaty, okay, this convention. Just a second, guys, bear with me. Just a second, y'all. So uh, diplomatic relations is in that moment, right? As a government official, okay. Uh, and there's a good book. Let's see. This is the name of the book in which Oxford comment, the Oxford Commentaries on International Law, Diplomatic Law. Okay, it's the commentary on divine and conventional diplomatic relations. In this book, it's quite wordy, but it's a good book to understand the commentaries. And commentaries are basically um, different legal and lawful references of how you can understand the particular document in a more extensive manner. So it'll bring up cases, so it'll expound on a certain article, right? So commentaries are good to read. Let me check to see if anybody else came in. Okay. Peace, Ma.
Peace, peace.
Okay, so diplomatic relations, just to get it understood, is pretty much um, the first thing that must be done. Okay. Um, and it's different from recognition of the state as well. So there's what's called, we went over what's called track two diplomacy, right? And I'm kind of just recapping before we continue. We went over what's called track two diplomacy, right? Which is being able to send even unofficials or non-government officials to be representatives for a state, right? Or diplomats, right? And there's even what's called economic diplomacy, okay? And that's basically um, when, international policies are established to basically help the growth of a state, okay? Especially when they're in a financial crisis, okay? So that's called economic diplomacy. So economic diplomacy is what? Economics. That's what the triple principle, that's the final step of the triple principle, right? So a lot of our first steps build into the second and even third steps. But so what is, yeah, let's just take a guess. I'll ask y'all before I say anything else. What does where did I just read that? Well, anyways, where does economic diplomacy, what does that mean to y'all? As far as building international coalitions, right? Policies to basically help countries recover from financial crisis. So think about our position, right? What is that? What does this afternoon look like? What does this look like we can do? How can we exercise economic?
Well, I would say communication and a build up. Um, Something along the lines of recognizing the economic avenue. If um, diplomatic relations along those lines.
We're talking about economics. We're talking about how can we rebuild ourselves financially. So we talking about exercising wealth, right? So we talking about basically at the end of the day, people, there are states, even organizations, right? That there's even organizations in the United Nations that assist other states financially. This is what you call economic diplomacy. When you establish relations specifically for, not specifically for, but establish diplomatic relations. One of the reasons being for economic diplomacy, which basically means to help people out financially. So you reach out to other states and even organizations in what type of manner? In that manner, right? Now we're talking about Moors, you are just plain rich, right? Well, we know in international law, there's people that want to assist us, right? Okay, so let's think upon this avenue, right? On how we can filter, bottleneck these avenues into eventually working for yourself, eventually rebuilding the community, right? But we have to establish layer by layer, avenue by avenue, right? So economic diplomacy, yes, we will financially help you, right? XYZ dollars, right? We're talking about states here, right?
I have a question.
Hmm.
So could dang, I lost it. Yeah, I lost it. It was pertaining to land though. Like, could that be like say, dang, I just had it. I lost it though, but um, it was along the lines of land being gifted in a sense instead of like it being financial. Could it? Does it always have to be
Hmm.
like a dang, I lost it. I'm just thinking about in terms of like physical commodities.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay,
Um,
so in terms of land, right?
mm,
So if it's land in your state, we're talking about integrity of your domain. So this is yours already
mm,
in
I
respect
get
to
you. I get you.
you see.
Yeah, I get
So
you.
and that's a good avenue to also open up as well because in regards to state property and individual property, right? So you might own something. You might own something. The state might own something, right? You got to let's just say more states get a state bill, right? Opposed to you going out and getting a house, right? Of course, that's different avenue in which those must be laws must be enacted to exercise all that as well in due time. But so that's the difference, just to kind of speak on that, because I even though it's obvious, we have to rebrand everything. You know what I mean? So I'm sure that was pretty much obvious as far as state own something, individuals own something. But we basically reverse it. They picture us in that situation and be like, okay, so our land in this state, right? Yes, it's this individual's by right because X, Y, Z, or yes, it's the state's by right because X, Y, Z, right? Other land outside the states, well, that's according to their state, that's theirs, that states. Um, uh, but yeah, it's a lot of unwavering principles, you know. Even when information being held out, there's a lot of Moors, there's a lot of spiritual people in general that see the pyramids, that see giants and Smithsonian information being held from us, right? All information is going to be a part of the state, just like it's part of their so-called state, right? In due time, right? Everybody want to go travel the inner earth, and, HARP, go take control of HARP, and get rid of 5G. All this stuff is in the states. You see what I'm saying? So for us to ground all of this, anything that spirituality is talking about, it starts with nationality, which is connecting yourself to the earth, grounding yourself. This is the first step. This is like the baby coming out the womb in a new age, and everybody must do it. This is the whole every knee shall bow type of thing because These are the laws that are being realized because we've been not following in order for our earthly liberation, right? So, and when we talk about nationality in the whole, we talk about a nation. That's a whole sea. That's a whole plane. We talk about the navel, right? Connection from the center, right? So let's continue with this document, and let's see, we're gonna stop. We're on the next page here. Article 21 says the receiving state shall either facilitate acquisition on its territory in accordance with its laws by the sending state of premises necessary for its mission or assist to the later in attaining accommodation in some other way. Okay. So acquisition, right? Facilitate the acquisition on its territory in accordance to the law. What laws? Well, we got to create laws. We got to enact laws. What laws do we have? We got treaties, right? But treaties can be enforced by states based on their laws. What laws? We got to create laws first, enforce them specifically. What does that mean? Well, Noble Ali said there's no need to reinvent the wheel, right? Okay, so that means the laws are already out there. What does that mean? We got to know how to plug and play real good. We got to know how to be the greatest editors of all time. That's that. There's no need to reinvent. Ease up on the stress. There's nothing to reinvent. We just got to know where to put what. So it says it also, where necessary, assist missions in obtaining suitable accommodations for their members. Okay. Article 22, the premises of the mission shall be inviolable, which means it should not be violated. Okay. The agents of the receiving state may not enter them except with the consent of the head of the mission. The receiving state is under a special duty to take appropriate steps to protect the premises of the mission against the intrusion or damage, and to prevent any disturbance of the peace of the mission or impairment of its dignity. Okay. Duties of the head of the mission. Okay. The premises of the mission, their furnishings, and other property thereon, and other means of transport of the mission shall be immune from search, requisition, attachment, or execution. So you traveling, you should be immune, right? Like building up an immune system of protection, right? You should be immune from search, requisition, attachment, or execution. The premises of the mission, what's the premises? The territory. What's the territory? The territory of the state. You're the receiving state, right? Exercising integrity of domains, right? With a dependent state. They're not a true state. They're not an independent state. They're a dependent state. So they're doing diplomatic relations with a dependent state, right? That's what they're called for that. They're truly an international organization. The United States of America is a dependent state, right? So Article 23, the sending state of the head of the mission shall be exempt from all national, regional, and municipal dues and taxes in respect to the premises, in respect of the premises of the mission, whether owned or leased, other than such represent payment for specific services rendered. Okay. The exemption from taxation rendered to in this article shall not apply to such dues and taxes payable under the law of the receiving state by persons contracting with the sending state or the head of the mission. So taxes, you good, right? As a diplomat. right? Basically. Article 24, and this is the last page we'll be reading from. Article 24, the archives and documents of the mission shall be inviolable at any time and wherever they may be. So inviolable again means they shall not be violated, cannot be violated. Article 25, the receiving state shall accord full facilities for the performance of the functions of the mission. Article 26, subject to its laws and regulations concerning zones entry into which is prohibited or regulated for reasons of national security. Remember, diplomatic relations, we're talking about security, right? The receiving state shall ensure to all members of the mission freedom of movement and travel in its territory. Okay. So this is rendering national security laws, right, to be enacted. Article 27, the receiving state shall permit and protect free communication on the part of the mission of all official purposes, in communicating with the government and of the missions and other missions and consulates, of the sending state, wherever situated. The mission may employ all appropriate means, including diplomatic couriers, and messages in code and cipher. However, the mission may install and use a wireless transmitter only with the consent of the receiving state. Okay, so this is instructions as far as you'll see that when you study diplomatic relations, they talk about a diplomatic bag in which must not be searched and seized, etc. Right. So this is one of those types of instructions, right? Just particular instructions. Okay. The official correspondence of the mission shall be inviolate. Official correspondences means all correspondence relating to the mission and its function. Okay, so all correspondences relating to the mission. Okay, what mission? In that book, then that I showed you on the commentaries, it speaks on separating your personal life, and your diplomatic relations, right? So that's a good book to read in regards to that. But again, we must think our situation is different. Okay, so simply going to again drop off documentation at the post office is diplomatic work. Okay. Um, Section 3. The diplomatic bag shall not be opened or detained. That's what I was talking about earlier. The packages constituting the diplomatic bag must bear visible external marks of their character and may contain only diplomatic documents or articles intended for official use. The diplomatic carrier, who shall be provided with an official document indicating his status and member of package constituting the diplomatic bag, shall be protected by the receiving state in the performance of his function. He shall enjoy person's inviolability and shall not be liable to any form of arrest or detention. Okay. The sending state of the mission may designate diplomatic couriers ad hoc. In such cases, the provisions of paragraph 5 of this article shall also apply, except that the immunities therein mentioned shall cease to apply, and such a courier has delivered to the consignants the diplomatic bag in his charge. Okay, so as we come to a close, read the last point. A diplomatic bag may be entrusted to the captain of the commercial aircraft scheduled to a land at an authorized port of entry. He shall be provided with an official document indicating the number of packages constituting the bag, but he shall not be considered to be a diplomatic carrier. The mission may send one of its members to take possession of the diplomatic bag directly and freely of the captain of the aircraft. Okay. So this document thus far, well, let's go back and read. Yeah, we'll go over Article 28 in part two. We'll start off there. Um, so this document is a good initial phase to understand in regards to us establishing ourselves as states. Okay, it's how we operate in love by law, because we're talking about friendly and peaceful relations, right? Peace, we talk about love, right? Solidifying love, right? We're not just talking about love and just speaking it, right? Peace is more so the balance aspect of all this, okay? The grounded aspect of all this, okay? Um, so this document, as we finish this document, we'll go into consular relations, okay? Um, I posted on Twitter uh, the documents that we, Maru State Republic, have acceded to, which is 34 in number. These particular documents are all the conventions and treaties that we'll be specifically talking about throughout our study session, because you cannot enforce a treaty if you have not acceded to it. Okay. Of course, all the treaties such as the Treaty of Madrid, Act of Outer Series, are the treaties that have given us our power to be states, right? Um, so and those go without to say, but I should have had that in this class, but I'll show you guys in the next class the actual list of treaties, if you haven't seen that already, in conventions that we'll be talking about in a specific order. Okay, so um, diplomatic relations, consular relations, and we'll also go over the Charter of the United Nations. Okay, um, we spent some time speaking on how to establish a state, what is a state. Spent a good amount of videos on that. So now it's time to start another initiatory phase of things, of focus, uh, diplomatic relations, consular relations, as well as the Charter of the United Nations. Okay. Um, so with that, um, I'll yield to the floor to any comments or questions that may be. Nobody? Okay. I guess that was good. A good breakdown, huh? So again, I encourage everybody to read this document in their own time. Um, time is 4:44. Um, if there are no questions or comments at this time, we can conclude this class or the study session and pretty much start where we left off. So no questions.
I guess I'll just end with something real quick. Closing comment. I definitely understood the purpose of state as far as a domain, putting people You'll notice we can enforce our own laws, our law. ICJs. Yeah. Of course, we as a Moorish state are the receivers of the United States, quote unquote, corporation. Be sending out, and we will be the receivers. Yeah.
Yeah, in this convention, we're receiving state. So we will be, like you said, receiving or putting them under Moroccan law, just as we're receiving or putting um, the straw man, so quote unquote, under the Moroccan states.
And we're simply picking up where we left off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense. It's all about just doing, like you said, everything in the correct order so that you can, so we'll be able to enforce these things in due time.
There's a lot of things that we're doing now. It's probably premature, premature things. It's kind of out of order, a few things you can see.
Yeah, and just as Dare state, the order, as we read articles and see the order of these articles, right? We see the build up. It's like a story, right? It gives you the definitions as if it was the context of a book, right? Then it goes into the basics, right? The first few articles might expound upon things in a general sense, right? Therefore, you can just use those first few articles and then it goes in a breakdown, right? Or, the body might operate different, right? But nonetheless, the order of the articles in the treaties and conventions are in that order for a specific reason because that's the numbering of the instructions a lot of times, right? So if we haven't checked Article 1, if you want to say, without checking Article box, the instructions or the box in Article 1, 2, and 3, checking boxes in Article 4, 5, and 6 a lot of times are weird, right? So it's a ritual, right? It's a build up. It's a, it's if you want to just say consciousness naturally blooming out just in law and numbers, you know. So we can look at it that way, and even how religion, um, remember how Noble Drew used that to shroud everything, and that's the First Amendment in the United States Constitution, right? So uh, even in that sense, right, we're talking about using the chronological order or the subsequent order of things, um, because that's how things are supposed to be done.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Also, I feel like that's where a lot of the confusion has come from amongst the Moors promoting certain things or claiming certain titles or saying that they control certain venues without taking those steps, jumping from the first step all the way to the sixth step and then promoting that is never going to be the right thing to push because you're steering the people astray.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I felt that this is a good meeting, uh, good breakdown of things. Again, this is the introductory phase, so I'll try to have videos next time. Um, uh, People speaking on a few different points. I'm not sure how to. My phone is acting crazy, so in order for me to speak on my phone that I'm using now, I have to use my headphones. If I don't, you guys won't be able to hear me. So And if I try to show videos with these headphones, you guys won't be able to hear the video. So I'll figure out a way to do this here soon. But we can conclude the class there if there are no more comments or questions. So since there are no more comments or questions, with that said, inshallah, I bless you all. I'll post the video on YouTube, and I'll see you guys next time.
Peace.
Peace. Thank you.
Peace.
Peace and love.